cultural and safety amenities for 2022-23. And this is the recommendations to approve the levies to the Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Board, the Museum of Transport and Technology, and the Auckland War Memorial Museum, and some recommendations also on future changes to processes. So just to put it on the record, I will move. I'll ask for a seconder. Councillor Shane Henderson, and Sarah Johnson-Smith. I think, Sarah, you're going to introduce the item for us.
Kia ora koutou katoa, and good morning, everyone. I'm introducing this report on behalf of my colleagues Ed Siddle and Chris Levitt, who are also on this call, as we've worked together to author it with input from Council's finance team and Auckland Unlimited by virtue of their role in providing advice to Council on MOTAT's proposed levy. So as you've outlined, this report provides the staff recommendations on the proposed levies for 2022-23 for the three entities, the Museum, MOTAT and the Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Board. These entities have separate but broadly similar statutory processes that enable them to levy council for funding, and these processes all have a 30 April deadline, whereby the levies must be set by agreement or, failing that, by arbitration. So following the initial levy requests we received from these entities, staff alongside the Mayor, we've had additional conversations with these entities about whether they could reduce their original requests to assist council with the financial pressures it's facing. And as you've heard, both the Museum and MOTAT responded positively to this request, with the Museum agreeing to take a nil increase for 2022-23 and MOTAT reducing its request by $675,000. So this cooperation is obviously very warmly welcomed and much appreciated. Arafa, the Regional Amenities Funding Board, declined to reduce its request. The report concludes with some commentary about the challenges with these existing legislative regimes in the context where council has a challenging financial situation and must make decisions on these levies separately and ahead of other council planning and budgeting processes. So the report recommends that staff be requested to consider more intensive and earlier engagement with these entities for the 2023-24 levy process, but also undertake some focused discussions about future changes to the relationships between council and these entities, building on the strong relationships and the collaboration that we already have in place. So we're happy to take questions, which either Ed, Chris or myself will do our best to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was a great summary of the paper. So we'll take questions first and then come to comments if there are some. And the first question is in the name of Councillor Daniel Newman, followed by Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank
Daniel.
you. In relation to the... thank you, Your Worship. Thank you. Noting the process whereby they can make the application, and if we decline it, then we go to arbitration, and noting what has just been referred to as the growing cost of the renewal of the facility, and it is very capital hungry, what is the risk here that we go on this projected path for the next 2 to 3 years, and then we face a situation where, in order to make a correction, they're looking at a 20 to 25% adjustment in their funding in order to try and do that catch up, as was referred to earlier?
Sarah.
Oh, sure, sorry. Hard to virtually look at my colleagues and ask which one's going to cover it. Look, I think we would acknowledge that obviously they set a levy for the current year they're in, and then with sort of an indication for the out years of what that might look like. And obviously council gets the opportunity annually to look at that. So I think by virtue of one of our recommendations here about having that very early engagement ahead of the 2023-24 levies, that should be one way in which we can work with the entities to understand what's coming down the pipe and how any significant increases might be able to be worked through. And you'll note, for example, with the approach that's been taken with MOTAT, by virtue of the way they've utilised their levy request, enables them to borrow and spread the costs of their projects over a time period, which reduces the level of significant increase that they need year on year. Ed or Chris, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Sarah, thanks. I just add that there is the mechanism of the Rangatira Forum and regular meetings for the executive group to have discussions around this issue in the lead up to the levy process for next year.
Thank you very much. Ed, any further comment from you?
No, nothing from me, thanks.
Okay, and Daniel, have you got a further question?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, Chair, Your Worship, I mean, you know, I go along with this, but I mean, what comes to mind in the form of a question is that, you know, how aware are we of the renewals program that the museum needs to be on top of? Because if we're not familiar with that, I don't see how we could avoid the nasty surprise of the sort of costs that are going to have to come in the form of a levy to us, because the museum can't not do the renewal of that facility, and we're in the gun for it if the cost is not met this year and next year. So I'd want to know what is the line of sight that officers have to the renewals program that needs to be met, which will form the basis of future costs. Yes, we can have that early engagement with staff, but we should be familiar with their capital works program ourselves, because it's that particular cost that will have to become non-negotiable as part of their future levy. They will need to maintain that facility.
Right.
Did you want to offer a comment on that?
Councillor Newman, the museum provides us with its asset management plan, and has done since we first received it a couple of years ago, and that maps out the renewals program over the next 20 years. So we do have a good line of sight of the renewals through that, and of course that's backed by a major component of the levy every year being renewals focused. So I'm not exactly sure of the figure because that's Chris's department, but it's approaching $10 million a year every year for renewals that the museum has to manage.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is just around the Arafa funding. Is this normally consulted on in the annual plan? Has it been done this time in terms of this list of who gets what? Has the public seen this? Normally we do.
Councillor, that's one for me to answer as well. No, the process for consulting on the Arafa plan is set out in the Arafa Act, and the consultation is the responsibility of the Arafa board. It puts out a funding plan, which it publicly consults on, and then it determines the levies. That's determining the individual allocations to entities is not the role of council in this process. So the short answer is no, it doesn't get consulted through the annual plan in the same way that we consult on our other budgets.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have further questions, so we'll come now to comments. Oh, sorry, to my left. I've got blind on my left side, Councillor Cashmore. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
An increasing problem, I've noticed, Mr. Mayor. So with all due respect, the museum has an expensive building, and Councillor Newman is absolutely correct in that. And, you know, sandstone, limestone buildings are expensive to maintain, and a lot of assets inside that are expensive to maintain. They have an asset management program, as it is spelt out. But Ed, has that asset management program had independent review and analysis?
I mean, I would probably have to refer that question to the museum, and but I'm fairly sure that they have worked closely with external consultants to develop that asset management plan. But we haven't, as a council and as staff, had it independently reviewed. No, that's not really within our remit as in terms of the museum's legislation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We come now to
excuse
comments.
Me, Phil, sorry,
Councillor Sayers. Sorry, you've got a question?
Just
Yep.
joined the meeting. I've just joined the meeting. I hope you've got my apologies for lateness, but just to record that I'm now online.
No, that's fine, thank you. Were you wanting a question, councillor?
No,
Just
acknowledging.
Okay, thank you for letting us know that. Okay, we'll come now to comments, and the first comment I've got, Councillor Linda Cooper, followed by Councillor Chris Darby.
Thank you, Your Worship. I need to say first is that I really appreciate the museum being willing to agree to an increase this year, but I absolutely acknowledge in the next few years we need to start moving that up again. It is difficult, and with MOTAT, you know, we can't let the buildings fall down, but I also want to note, and I don't know whether the public know this, but my understanding is that those levies are based on capital value, which has been soaring, so that gives a bigger pot. But the Arafa funding is based on rateable value. So it's just you know, I think it's a pretty unfair playing field. But I acknowledge the museum, the work you've done on that and MOTAT. I have to signal that I cannot vote for B, the Arafa funding, because I absolutely disagree with the way it is, the grant allocation is for this year. It's so heavily to the arts who have not had, I acknowledge they've put online events on, etc. But if you look at the relativity, 4.1 million for Auckland Festival, but we haven't been able to have festivals. Auckland Philharmonia, 4.5 million. You've got New Zealand Opera getting 195,000 increase. You know, the bang for bucks is not there. But if you look at the organisations that have been under huge pressure over lockdown, we know that our beaches and our places have been absolutely swamped with people every time they're allowed to get out because they've got nowhere else to go. And so our rescue helicopter, no increase. They get 450,000 a year. Drowning prevention, they're going to get 53,000 extra, 1.1. And we know the drownings. We had another one at Piha on Anzac morning. If you look at Helicopter Trust, yeah, as I said, nothing. Surf Lifesaving, a measly 24,000 increase, and they get 1.3. And they're working all over the region, and it's volunteers. And we know that's so critical. They're kind of miserable proposals to me, and I know it's not us that decide it, but I can't condone that. During the last 2 years, those are the organisations that have been under pressure, absolute pressure. And if you look at the amount of increase for the Philharmonia, it's nearly half of the whole increase, and it's actually more than half of what Surf Life, just the increase is more than half than what Surf Lifesaving Northern get. I just find it appalling that that's not being addressed. So that's why I can't, I could vote for the total amount, but I can't vote for it because I just don't think that the organisations that everybody has an opportunity to interface with are not being supported to the level they need, whereas things like, and this is no denigration of the actual institutions, but it's where are our priorities as a region? You know, 4, 8, 10, 12, 15, if it goes to the arts, but a measly amount goes to the emergency services and the volunteers that put their life on the line to rescue people and keep people safe. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, this is a difficult conversation given the financial constraints that we're operating under, and I appreciate the contributions from Penny Hulse and David Gamister. I posed the question to David and Penny about the importance of cultural institutions and arts funding generally in our reset and recovery. And there's a lot of evidence around the world that, you know, it is so important to bind people together, and Penny Hulse referred to this bringing of people together, to create this social cohesion through the cultural institutions. It's a really important part. We do necessarily get quite fixated with the so-called core infrastructure, building things that support housing, and very important it is. but we cannot lose sight of the place that cultural infrastructure is required to play. It is actually required to play a role in our reset and recovery. And it is going to be a very important role in bringing Aucklanders together, out of their shells, out of their homes, and out of everything that we've been, unfortunately, due to COVID, been, constrained from and go to. So we as a city, we've got to socialise more, and without this infrastructure and ongoing investment in this cultural infrastructure, we are at risk of not being able to do that. So that is why I can definitely support this. I'm not being a sporty spice or an arty spice on this. I'll be supporting both counts. Both sides of the Arafa funding are really important. I'm stressing some conviction for the support of the arts and cultural institutions. And yep, we've been hit by COVID coming along and ankle tapping us on the Auckland Arts Festival, but we've got to be prepared for the opportunity of running the next one and get that up and going. The only other area I would like to comment on is the funding, the $374 million funding for arts and culture, I think it was called recovery package that government assigned. I think the Museum Hardship Fund only saw about 2 million of that 374, and that went to Te Papa. And I can't see any record of any other funding in that area, though there is a recognition, I think, in a recent summary of 46 museums benefiting. I think that was more for programs. But I guess I'm mentioning that because I think David Gamister and the museum probably need our political support rather than them just making applications. We probably need to be working more closely with them on making those appeals to that fund and other funds rather than just letting them go by themselves. I appreciate that they've got autonomy in that area, but let's offer our support if it is required by David's team. So on that, I am totally up for the investment, the ongoing investment. It's somewhat reduced in the cultural infrastructure. I'm very mindful, and many of us will remember how we decimated, unbeknown to us, because we didn't probably see the detail, the Public Art Fund. It was absolutely struck down with fury, and now it's got a real challenge to get back. We can't allow that to happen to the cultural infrastructure of the city, and particularly the big beacon on the hill in the Domain.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'm very pleased to follow Councillor Darby on this one. As a former Minister of Arts and Culture, I would be remiss if I did not speak in support of the importance in a post-COVID world of what the arts and cultural sector can do in uniting us, providing a place of refuge, and also helping us really come to terms with who we really are. So I have a lot of sympathy for the plight of the Domain, and I acknowledge that it's been hard to get Wellington engaged. If you look back to the World War I Centennial Fund that was put together, we weren't the beneficiary of funding coming out of Wellington. It went to other regions. So I think it is time for us to really unite behind the whole sector. But I would be remiss if I didn't draw attention to the fact, as I have consistently done, that the Arafa legislation is so out of date. It denies Aucklanders the opportunity to look strategically at how we want to make our investments in the arts and cultural sector, and it just becomes one of ticking a box rather than taking that long-term strategic vision that we must in terms of where we're trying to put our funding, what we're trying to achieve. So I guess I again implore you, Your Worship, to actually highlight to Wellington the importance of getting a review of that legislation. It was introduced for all the right reasons. You know, we were a very, prior to amalgamation, we were divided. People didn't want to make that commitment to those wonderful facilities that we have in Auckland. And I acknowledge the former Minister, Judith Tizard, for her advocacy in trying to get that legislation advanced. But with amalgamation, it actually should have been withdrawn. And that to me is the anomaly, and that's what we're really still trying to grapple with. So I will support the recommendations today, but I would implore you to continue to talk to Wellington about the ongoing legislation that we need to really have it fit for purpose for Auckland in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fletcher. And in reply, if I can start off with Councillor Chris Fletcher's last point, there is no doubt that not only the Arafa legislation, but also the museum and the MOTAT legislation is anachronistic, out of date and unrealistic. It was designed, as you and I both remember and agree, for a time when we had 8 councils or 7 territorial councils who could never agree on any damn thing, and there was court action and God knows what else. We are now a unitary authority, so we don't need to work through special legislation that was designed for different circumstances. And if you look at page 14 on the report, the legislation actually says that we might have to pay $150 million a year to the museum. Now, that would be quite good if you wanted to have a chief executive, I think a 7% extra rate increase just to pay for that. To the MOTAT, it could be $25 million. For Arafa, $40 million. These are 1, unrealistic caps, 2, a system that requires arbitration that in itself is expensive. And what we want to do is have a direct relationship with those bodies that serve our public here in Auckland well, and we want to do it without the shackles of government legislation. So in the time that I have remaining, Councillor, I will continue to push the case for that. It is absolutely a strong case. I do want to thank very warmly both MOTAT, that has always been cooperative with this council and its working relationship, and acknowledge that and their readiness to recognise the financial challenge that we have because of the pandemic, and likewise the Auckland War Memorial Museum. It's sad that the Arafa board wasn't able to make a contribution in that way, but I've had their reasons explained to me and I understand where they're coming from. But it leaves us in a position where we have demands on us from all over the place. We'd like to spend more on all of those amenities, but we can only spend more when we've got the money to do that. And there are a lot of competing claims on what we're asking for. I just want to pick up one point Councillor Linda Cooper raised, which was about the Auckland Philharmonia. We had a discussion here, I think 2 years ago, where we recognised that the people that were professional players in that band were being paid less than the living wage. And there was no way we were going to retain that as a cultural organisation. And we recognised that we had to do something about that, and we locked that in 2 years ago, and that explains why the disproportionate increase is going to the APO. They have worked virtually online to do performances, etc. But either you decide you have an organisation like that in Auckland or you don't. But if you have it, you can't have it and pay them less than a wage that they can live on for people who are professional and actually could sell their services around the world, let alone around New Zealand. Look, I want to commend the approvals today to council members. There will come a time when we've put the pandemic behind us, when we can afford to be to invest more heavily in those institutions. But sadly, the time is not now, and everybody around this table and online for this meeting understands the pressure that happens when suddenly $900 million that you might have been spending is no longer available to spend because it's been taken from us as a result of COVID-19. So the motion has been moved and seconded. I'm going to ask Sandra to note Councillor Cooper's no vote on recommendation.
Just clarify something, Mr Chair,
Yep,
that
sure.
you said. We, as it says in the report, we approved the first tranche of increase, and this is the opportunity to approve the second. So I happily approve the first, but I
Yep.
don't
Okay,
support,
thank you for
and
that
it's not about
clarification.
Philomonia, it is about the
Yep. I'm
way
sorry,
it's
I'm
distributed.
really out of order in accepting it because we're about to put the vote. I just wanted to register with Sandra that you'd be voting against recommendation B.
And, Your Worship, myself too, please, against B.
That's
Thank
Councillor
you.
Tracy Mulholland. Yep,
Thank
thank
you.
you. I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. I declare that carried with 2 votes in opposition to recommendation B. Right, we come now to item number 10,